Now, damages were very interesting because, in my opinion, there were none. There were some, but not a lot. Joe and Jeffers found the witness from heaven. The expert had gotten the first doctorate. His name was Barrow, James Barrow, I believe. Who? Don't correct me up here, please. Thomas Barrow was the first person to receive a doctorate in geology from Stanford University. He spent his whole life in the oil business, and he had been, I think, chairman of the board of Kennecott Company. He had been a vice president of one of the major oil companies, and I think it was one of the Standard Oil companies, but he would not accept any money for his testimony. He was a good friend of John McKinley's. He hardly knew Hugh Lidke from Pennzoil, and his testimony was, I came here to protect the integrity of contract. So he testified, very simple approach to the damages. If the company, if Pennzoil had been able to proceed, they would have had 3/7 their ownership of the new merged company. The company had 2.3 billion barrels of oil. That means that the 3/7 would have been 1 billion barrels of oil that Pennzoil would have fallen heir to. Now, over here on the right-hand side is a calculation of the savings in buying that oil rather than having to go out and discover it. Discovery costs and exploration and drilling costs had just escalated in this period. Texacos were the highest in the industry. They had gone after well and spent billions of dollars, and all they got was dry holes. The delta between buying the oil and finding it themselves was $7 and I think 53 cents. So what Pennzoil said was we would have saved $7.53 per barrel of oil that we didn't have to go out and find, times 1 billion barrels that we would have had if our deal had gone through. And that's very simplistic, but that's kind of what the damage model was. The argument on the other side should have been that what Pennzoil bought was stock. They were buying 3/7 of the stock of Getty Oil. It was publicly traded. They didn't buy oil barrels. And maybe they would have been entitled to the difference between what they would have paid for the stock, Pennzoil, and what Texaco ultimately paid for it. But that's not the argument that was made. Texaco had a superb team of damage experts. But Dick Miller, who I say was one of the great trial lawyers this country has ever produced, had won case after case after case on liability. Just killed companies on liability. And he really believed, Dick did, that he had this case won. My wife always says, if you want to know, she's also a trial lawyer in addition to becoming a rabbi or whatever you do. I don't know, whatever she is. No, my wife always says, if you want to know how the case is going to come out, ask me 3 weeks before trial, or you end up blowing smoke and thinking that you're going to win it. So, at the end of the trial, they got to the very end, and everybody was waiting. The jurors, according to Jim Shannon's book, were all waiting for the damage experts from Texaco to shoot down what they saw was kind of a weak or at least a vulnerable damage model. And Dick rested without putting on a single damage witness. Now, in Dick's defense, as I say, he'd won case after case. He said that if he gave Jamail even the slightest opening and said, well, maybe they're entitled to a couple $100 million, he'd have killed him on that argument. He was very concerned. Joe knew how to argue damages. My impression is that Dick had won so many cases on liability that it was just force of habit, because, as you know, it did not turn out to be a very good decision.